It was getting dark and James was hard at work, making stays for corsets. But just then, Manchester C Division burst through the door and grabbed hold of him, arrested him for murder of his own father. On the 11th of August 1855 in Manchester, an Irish varnish maker, a 60-year-old John Monogan, died at home, 11 Hope Street in Chorlton, a house in which he shared with his daughter Liza and Francis Keane, her husband. It was Francis who went to fetch Dr. J. Hatton, who stated the cause of death as chronic dysentery. And following this, John was buried at St. Wilfrid's, a Roman Catholic church in Hulme. After John's body had been buried, it was found out that Francis, his son-in-law, had taken out an insurance policy on John's life to the sum of £10.16, which is around £10.80. And with no suspicious circumstances surrounding the death, the insurance company, a Wellington Insurance Co., paid out and closed the account. But if the story had ended there, all would have been fine. However, a red flag has just been raised when it turned out one of John's sons, James, had also taken out a policy on John with Diadem Life Insurance Company for the massive sum of £300. The insurance company, however, refused to pay and started growing suspicious. James, undeterred, took the insurance company to court, with the case going to trial on February 1856 in the Court of the Exchequer. To prepare for Diadem's solicitor, a Mr. Thomas Rogers of London's Fenchurch Street, he sent his highly professional principal clerk, a Mr. Charles Bradlaugh, to the sprawling industrial city of Manchester to make further inquiries. On his arrival, it didn't take Mr. Bradlaugh long to unearth a good deal of circumstantial evidence, which rapidly pointed to a conspiracy of murder, forgery, and perjury, which he believed involved several people. And with the case having so many twists and drama, the newspapers rapidly picked it up, and the country was fascinated by what became to be known as the Manchester poisoning case. And now, with the eyes of the country watching, the events played out in the city's police and coroner's courts, and eventually, due to the handling of the case, it ended up at Liverpool Assizes. During the investigation, Mr. Bradlaugh revealed Diadem's agent, who agreed to the policy on John's life, a 22-year-old Edward Dunn, who had put John's age down on the policy as 10 years younger than his actual age, as well as there being several thefts under this agent, including a cheque to a widow of one of the policy owners. Mr. Bradlaugh had him arrested, also stating that he was in on the conspiracy with James. And on these charges, he was now facing the possibility of penal transportation to one of the British colonies abroad. Mr. Bradlaugh was now on a roll, and he saw people linked to the conspiracy everywhere. And armed with circumstantial evidence, he ordered Superintendent Leary of Manchester City C Division to arrest all the men involved. And on the 22nd of January, the police went out in force to apprehend the guilty men. First, the police forced their way through the busy crowds and carts that filled Smithfield Market. They sprang into action, knocking stalls and produce everywhere. They arrested George Barry, a stall holder, but at the same time, the police arrested a Dr. Thomas Bull Holland at his home. Both men were taken back to the station as the superintendent and his men broke through the door of James Monogan. As he got up to flee in sheer surprise, an officer tackled him to the ground. Now all four men were dragged before the city's police court on the 23rd of January 1856. The confident Mr. Bradlaugh acted as prosecutor, but in a surprise twist announced to the court he would not offer evidence against Dr. Holland, and upon this was released from the dock. To the surprise of the remaining men on trial and the court, the doctor was now to be called as a prosecution witness to aid Mr. Bradlaugh to prove the guilt of the other men. To this, Mr. Bradlaugh put forward that the others had used the poor doctor to gain his knowledge of poisons. Sat in the witness box, the doctor looked a sad figure, hunched over, eyes cast down, once having a thriving practice, all lost to his addiction to alcohol. Hope seemed pretty bleak for the three men still in the dock. But it was this moment the defence raised the concern. How can there be proof of poison when there has been no post-mortem on John Monogan's body? Irritated, Bradlaugh requested a pause in the trial and asked for the defendants to be kept in custody, as he intended to demonstrate that they had the motive, means and opportunity of committing the murder. The motive was a £300 insurance policy, the means was by administering poison, and the opportunity, he contested, was that James had poisoned his father through the use of whiskey over a period of time. And with this, the judge gave his permission to hold the men and to exhume the body. So on the 24th of January, 5 raggedly dressed labourers set out through St Wilfrid's churchyard, having been hired to exhume John's remains. With shovels in hand, they walked over to the grave on the far side of the cemetery. But just before the shovels hit the dirt, they were stopped by Mr Timperley, the undertaker, who came running over with his arms in the air. There's the problem. John's grave was not at this spot. This was somebody else's resting place, and John's grave could not be located. As John was placed in a public grave, and these are basically graves for the poor, where large numbers of people are buried in one grave, so it's pretty much a mass grave. And with there being a large number of public graves and no headstones on the public graves, this was turning into an arduous task. To make the matters worse, it had started to rain. The labourers dug until midnight, going through grave after grave. Days went by, with the men searching. Even John's family came to help the 5 men and the undertaker locate the body. While this went on, the defence pushed for the trial to be thrown out, as without a body there was no evidence of poisoning, and it looked like there might be hope for the men on trial. But rumours were starting to spread that these men had hired someone to remove the body when suspicion started. This would have been relatively easy to do, as with public graves they are left open, as bodies are placed in over a number of days, with just a temporary cover to hide the bodies until it is filled in. By midnight on the 3rd day, more men had been hired. 47 graves had been dug up, with the coffins removed and opened, each at a different stage of decomposition. And with the disturbance of so many bodies led to a very strong offensive smell, drifting into the surrounding homes of the surrounding neighbourhoods, which led to many complaints about the smell, but also the desecration of the final resting place for so many souls. However, it's recorded Mr Bradlaugh was not interested in such considerations, as he had business to conduct. But by 3:30 p.m. on the 4th day, the coffin of John, complete with zinc plate, was located, and to the relief of the labourers, the unfortunate Mr Timperley identified the body of John Monogan. A jury was formed, and on the 29th of January they made their way to view the body of John, which was a customary thing to do of the period. The lid was lifted and the body of John was revealed. It's important to note at this point, the body had been decaying in the ground for 5 months. But still, despite the decomposition, it was agreed that it was John's body, and the trial was adjourned until the 6th of February, and a Dr. T.W. Dyson and a Dr. Hatton were hired to perform a surgical post-mortem and a chemical analysis. During the trial, Mr Bradlaugh tried everything he could think of to convince the court that these men were guilty. However, he sat head-bowed, silent, when the coroner's jury found that John Monogan's death was not the result of being poisoned. He had not been murdered. Mr Bradlaugh's case was now in tatters, and with no option but to withdraw the charges of murder against Dunn, Barry and James Monogan, the now famous Manchester poisoning case had come to an end. Well, almost. Mr Bradlaugh now pressed the courts and revealed he had important evidence regarding the timing of the meetings between the accused, and even if they hadn't committed the murder, they were still guilty of fraud. He accused the men of being inaccurate with their information of their meeting times and places, and police were sent to search the home of John Monogan for evidence. As the trial progressed, the defence still argued that there was no actual criminal action. The charges were only stemmed from Diadem Insurance Company not wishing to pay the £300 on the policy, which was rightfully James Monogan's. But at the closing of the case, the judge discussed the original murder charges, and from the evidence put before him, James had been nothing but a loving and caring son, who was devoted to his father. However, with a case of such a large sum of money, the judge found there had been an act of forgery committed in this case. The jury found all the defendants not guilty of murder, which now meant nobody would hang for the crime, but James, John's son, was found guilty of forgery, so his claim on the £300 was forfeit, and he was sentenced to 6 months imprisonment. When all the drama came to an end in the Manchester poisoning case, it had, quote, demonstrated the limitations of circumstantial evidence, no matter how incriminating it might seem, and no matter how suspicious the death appeared to be, end quote. And with the macabre body search and autopsy, it also highlighted how significant a role forensics pathology would be in future murder investigations. Another issue this case brought to light was the insuring of individuals' lives without their knowledge. It's also important to note that Mr. Bradlaugh faced considerable criticism in the press. They criticised the handling and the prosecution of the alleged murder case, which had relied solely on circumstantial evidence, rumour and hearsay. And unsurprisingly, the papers were especially critical of the mass exhumation. I think listening to that tale, we can all agree nobody wanted to be the surgeons performing the autopsy. That must have been horrendous after a 5-month decomposition period. Well, that'll be it for today. If you like this story and tales like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. I upload a video once a week on a Wednesday. See you then.